For 27 years, she'd swung her gavel like a queen's scepter, silencing lawyers and shattering lies with a flick of her wrist. Then one man turned the tables and brought her reign crashing down in her own courtroom. Inside the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, the air hummed with something heavier than the southern heat pressing against the windows. It was the weight of decades of unspoken rules, a truth carved into the building's brick and mortar. Anyone who passed through those creaking double doors knew the score. In Judge Clara Monroe's domain, she sat high behind the bench, her sharp gaze rarely lifting from the paper she shuffled, peering over her glasses with a look that could cut glass. Her voice carried a quiet authority that didn't need to shout to dominate. Every word landed like a brick, flattening anyone foolish enough to challenge her. Clara Monroe had ruled that courtroom for nearly 3 decades, building a reputation not celebrated in law journals or framed awards, but whispered in hushed tones over coffee at the Georgia Bar Association. Lawyers, especially black ones, steeled themselves when their cases landed on her docket. Her rulings had a way of leaning in a predictable, direct Iona pattern too subtle to prove on paper, but unmistakable if you'd ever faced her. Today, though, that pattern was about to hit a wall. Daniel Hayes walked in, his polished shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the worn floor. At 45, he'd carved out a name for himself, taking on cases others avoided, building a legacy that reached far beyond Atlanta's skyline. He wasn't just another attorney stepping into Monroe's territory, was a force she hadn't anticipated. Today felt different. He wasn't here only to defend his client, Malik Thompson, a man falsely accused of armed robbery. This was bigger. Daniel carried the weight of something deeper, a mission that went beyond the case file under his arm. And he had no intention of leaving that courtroom without shaking its foundations. Daniel Hayes had been in this courtroom before, but today the stakes were higher. He stood at the defense table, his posture calm, while Judge Clara Monroe sized him up with a glance that could sour milk. She didn't need to know the case details to dislike him. It showed in the way her lips tightened as he approached. At 45, Daniel had spent years tackling cases others wouldn't touch, earning a reputation as the lawyer who could unravel a prosecution story like it was frayed rope. That made him dangerous, especially to someone like Monroe, who'd spent 27 years bending the law to her will. This wasn't just about Malik Thompson, his client, a man pinned with an armed robbery he didn't commit. This was about dismantling a fortress she'd built brick by brick. "Mr. Hayes," Monroe drawled, barely glancing up from her notes. "Let's keep this moving. I've got a full schedule, and I don't have time for games." Her tone was a warning, unprovoked but calculated. Daniel adjusted his tie, his face a mask of composure. "I'll do my best, Your Honor," he replied, his voice smooth as polished wood. Monroe smirked, a flash of smugness crossing her face. "You'd better," she said, then nodded to the prosecution. Ethan Brooks, a young assistant DA with more ambition than skill, straightened up. "The state's ready, Your Honor," he said, tossing Daniel a cocky glance. Of course, they were ready. Monroe's courtroom was their playground, and the defendant was a black man like Malik. Malik sat beside Daniel, hands clasped tightly, shoulders hunched from years of being ground down by the system. Daniel gave him a quick nod. "We've got this," he said, before locking eyes with the bench. "Defense is ready, too," he announced, loud enough to ripple through the room. Monroe let out a sharp breath. "Fina, let's get on with it." The trial began, but it wasn't justice in motion. It was Monroe's personal theater. Every time Daniel spoke, she brushed his words aside like dust. Objections were denied without a pause. Ethan stumbled through weak arguments, and she threw him lifelines like a coach mentoring a star pupil. The jury saw it. The gallery felt it. But no one dare name it. No one except Daniel. He watched her closely, the way her jaw tightened when he spoke, the thinly veiled scorn in her every move. This wasn't just bias. It was a grudge, and he'd been preparing for it longer than she could guess. Monroe didn't hide her disdain. "Mr. Hayes, you're testing my patience," she snapped after he questioned a flimsy witness statement. "Mr. Hayes, One more baseless objection, and I'll hold you in contempt, she warned when he raised a valid point. This isn't your platform. Save the speeches for somewhere else. Daniel stayed calm, but inside he was coiled tight. She was digging her own grave, and he was handing her the shovel. Your Honor, he said, voice steady as iron. The prosecution just introduced evidence they never shared in discovery. That a Brady violation, plain and simple. A move for a mistrial. Monroe leaned back, adjusting her glasses with a dramatic sigh. Denied, she said, like she was shooing away a fly. Daniel didn't flinch. Just to clarify, Your Honor, you're ignoring a clear Brady violation? Her eyes narrowed, lips thinning into a line. I said denied, Mr. Hayes. The room stirred, reporters scribbled, whispers buzzed in the back. She felt the shift, too, her glare sharpening. You're this close to contempt, she hissed. Daniel tilted his head, unfazed. For what, Your Honor? Asking you to uphold the law. Her gavel crashed down, the bang echoing off the walls. Enough, she barked. The room froze, every eye on her except Daniel's. He could feel Malik's tension beside him, the muttered, "Don't let her win, man," barely audible. Daniel didn't respond, just eased back into his seat. Nothing further, Your Honor, he said, calm as ever. Monroe scoffed, thinking she'd won. She had no idea she'd just walked into his trap. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. The gallery hummed with tension, and Daniel sat still, waiting. He'd learned long ago when to push and when to let someone unravel themselves. Monroe was coming apart, and she didn't even see it. Ethan cleared his throat, rattled but pressing on. Mr. Wilson, can you confirm the defendant, Malik Thompson, was at the robbery scene? The witness, an older store clerk, shifted uncomfortably. I think so, he mumbled. Daniel shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. I think so isn't a positive ID. Monroe didn't blink. Overruled. Daniel exhaled, a subtle shake of his head for the jury to notice. He let Ethan fumble a few more questions before taking over. Mr. Wilson, he said, stepping forward, you think you saw my client. How certain are you? The man hesitated. Well, I thought. Monroe cut in. Move on, Mr. Hayes. Daniel turned slowly, meeting her stare. I'd like him to answer, Your Honor. Her voice turned cold. I said move on. For the record, Daniel said, unflinching, you're blocking the witness from clarifying his own words. Monroe's face twitched. I'm warning you. Daniel gave a faint smile. Understood, Your Honor. No further questions. He walked back, every step deliberate, feeling the room tilt in his favor. Monroe was losing control. She knew it. He knew it. He reached into his briefcase, fingers brushing the stack of papers that would bury her. Then the courtroom doors flew open, and the air changed. Something was coming, and Clara Monroe wasn't ready for it. The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse swung open with a thud that snapped every head in the room away from the witness stand. Two federal agents in sharp black suits marched in, their steps quick and purposeful, cutting through the tension like a knife. The chatter in the gallery died instantly, replaced by a silence so thick it seemed to choke the room. Daniel Hayes didn't move. He sat at the defense table, smoothing his tie with a steady hand, his face giving nothing away. Judge Clara Monroe blinked, her confusion flashing for a moment before hardening into irritation. What is the meaning of this? She snapped, her voice slicing through the stillness. The lead agent, a tall man with a no-nonsense stare, flashed his badge without breaking stride. Judge Clara Monroe, we need a word. Now. Her jaw clenched, and she straightened in her chair. I'm presiding over a trial, she shot back, her tone daring them to push further. The agent didn't flinch. This can't wait. Daniel caught the flicker of unease in her eyes there and gone, buried under her usual mask of control. She squared her shoulders, clinging to her authority. This is outrageous. Whatever it is, it'll wait until I'm done here. The second agent stepped up, his voice flat but firm. It's a federal matter. It doesn't wait. The gallery rustled with whispers, the jury craning their necks. curiosity breaking through their sworn neutrality. Ethan Brooks, the young prosecutor, shifted awkwardly in his seat. Your Honor, should we take a break?" he stammered, his earlier confidence gone. Monroe's hand tightened on the bench. "No," she barked, her sharpness betraying a crack in her armor. "We're not pausing for this. The defense is stalled enough already, and I won't." The lead agent cut her off, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The room erupted. Gasps bounced off the walls, a mix of shock and stifled cheers bubbling up from the gallery. For the first time in 27 years, Clara Monroe's grip on her courtroom slipped through her fingers. Daniel rose slowly, letting the moment settle like dust after a storm. He turned, scanning the jury's wide eyes, the gallery's stunned faces, the reporters scribbling like their pens might catch fire. Then he faced her. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "I believe you just denied my mistrial motion, but it looks like this trial is the least of your worries now." Monroe's face went pale, her carefully crafted poise crumbling. The lead agent stepped closer, unfolding the warrant. "Clara Monroe, you're under arrest on suspicion of bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and violating federal civil rights laws." Chaos broke loose. Voices clashed in the gallery, some dazed, some gleeful, others frozen in disbelief. The jury sat rigid, their gazes darting between Daniel and the woman who'd ruled them moments ago. Monroe's eyes flicked from the agents to the warrant, then landed on Daniel. She saw him now not just as another lawyer, but as the man who'd engineered her downfall. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice trembling where it once cut. Daniel picked up his briefcase, meeting her stare head-on. "I told you," he replied, calm and unshaken. "I play by the rules, even when the system doesn't." The lead agent moved to her side. "Judge, we need you to step down." She didn't budge at first, her hands gripping the bench like it could hold her steady. Then slowly she stood. The metallic snap of handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed through the room, sound sharper than any gavel she'd ever swung. The crowd didn't just watch. They bore witness to a reckoning 27 years in the making. For nearly 3 decades, Clara Monroe had held that courtroom in an iron grip. Lawyers shrank under her stare. Defendants knew hope was a long shot, and the system protected her, ignoring whispers of her skewed rulings and quiet contempt for men like Daniel. Now she stood where she'd sentenced so many others wrists bound, eyes wild with a mix of fury and fear. The energy in the room crackled, a once-in-a-generation moment no one saw coming. Ethan Brooks stared blankly ahead, his earlier swagger gone. The jury and gallery sat in stunned silence, processing the fall of a giant. Daniel let it sink in. He'd spent years piecing this together, every shady deal, every twisted verdict, every life she'd crushed under her thumb. He'd waited, biding his time, knowing her arrogance would be her undoing. Today it was. The second agent pulled out a sheet of charges and began reading aloud. "Clara Monroe, you're charged with multiple counts of bribery, obstruction of justice, abuse of judicial authority, and civil rights violations under federal law. You have the right to remain silent." Monroe's voice broke through, thin and ragged. "This is absurd," she spat. The agent didn't blink. "Tell it to your attorney." The gallery murmured louder now, reporters capturing every tremble in her hands, every falter in her stance. She glared at Daniel, venom in her eyes. "You," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger. He lifted his chin. "No, Your Honor. This is justice." The irony hung thick. After years of preaching law and order, she faced the very system she'd warped. The agents guided her toward the doors, but not before one final twist. A bailiff who'd served under her for years held the exit-opina routine move for any defendant. She paused, then stepped through. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. The silence that followed Clara Monroe's exit hung heavy in the Fulton County Courthouse, thick with the echoes of a moment no one could unsee. The door's final slam lingered in the air, a punctuation mark on her 27-year reign. The room seemed to hold its breath, every soul inside grappling with the weight of what had just unfolded. Daniel Hayes exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. His hands rested on the defense table, steady now after years of carrying this fight. Beside him, Malik Thompson stared ahead, his expression caught between disbelief and something softer hope. Maybe, though he didn't dare name it yet. "Man," Malik whispered, his voice rough and low, shaking his head like he could shake off the surreal scene. "I thought people like her never faced the music." Daniel glanced at him, his eyes drifting to the empty bench where Monroe had loomed moments ago. It looked smaller now, stripped of her shadow. "They do," he said quietly, his tone firm but heavy with everything it took to get here. "But the real lesson's still coming." The gallery stirred, soft murmurs breaking the hushed voices tinged with shock, others with a quiet thrill at seeing the untouchable brought low. The jury exchanged looks, their faces a mix of awe and unease, like they'd just witnessed history rewrite itself. Daniel stood still, taking it all in. He'd fought plenty of battles in this room, each one leaving a mark, but this was different. This wasn't just a win, it was a crack in a foundation he'd spent years chipping away at. He'd tracked Monroe's every move, every backroom deal, every skewed ruling, every life she dismissed with a flick of her pen. Patience had been his weapon, and today it paid off. But even as the room buzzed with the aftershock, a bitter edge gnawed at him. Malik still sat there, wrists rubbed, raw from cuffs that should never have touched him. Monroe was gone, but the mess she'd left behind lingered like smoke. The gallery's whispers grew louder, a hum of raw energy as people processed the fall of a judge who'd ruled like royalty. Reporters hunched over their notepads, pens flying to capture the scene, the tremble in Monroe's hands, the click of those cuffs, the way her throne had turned into a trap. Daniel turned his gaze to Ethan Brooks, the prosecutor who'd strutted in under Monroe's wing. The kid looked like a ghost now, pale, shaken, his hands clutching his notes like they could save him. The confidence he'd worn earlier had melted away, leaving him exposed without his mentor's shield. He'd bet on the wrong side, and it showed. Daniel cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the room's haze. A new judge had been brought in from down the Hala, gray-haired man named Walter Ellis, known for his steady hand and decades of keeping the scales balanced. Daniel squared his shoulders and faced the bench. "Your Honor," he began, his voice ringing clear, "given what's just happened, I move to dismiss all charges against my client, Malik Thompson." Judge Ellis leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes sharp but calm. "On what grounds, Mr. Hayes?" he asked, his deep voice steady as stone. Daniel turned slightly, letting his words carry to the jury before swinging back to the bench. "On the grounds that this trial was rotten from day one," he said, each word deliberate. "Clara Monroe's arrest proves what we've known all along: she wasn't neutral, and neither was this process. She buried evidence, silenced witnesses, and stacked the deck against my client. This wasn't a trial. It was a setup orchestrated by a judge who's now in cuffs. The only right move left is to undo the damage she caused." He paused, letting the weight settle, then locked eyes with Ellis. "Dismiss the charges, Your Honor. It's time to fix this." The room went still again, every ear straining for the response. Judge Ellis sat back, his gaze steady, weighing the plea with a quiet intensity. After a long beat, he nodded onto a small but firm gesture. "I agree," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The silence held for a moment longer, then Ellis leaned forward. "The charges against Malik Thompson are dismissed. Bailiff, remove his restraints." Time seemed to slow as the officer stepped up, the soft click of the cuffs unlocking, piercing the quiet. Malik's hands fell free, and he let out a shaky breath, the kind that carried years of weight with it. The relief hit him like a wave, his shoulders loosening as he flexed his fingers, the red marks from the metal still etched into his skin. Even Ethan Brooks, slumped at his table, didn't move, his face blank like he'd lost more than just a case. The courtroom settled into a husha, reverent kind of quiet as justice, late but real, washed over the space. Malik turned to Daniel, his voice barely a whisper, thick with everything he couldn't say. "I don't even know where to start, man." Daniel clapped a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You don't have to," he said, his tone solid but warm. For once, the system worked. And it didn't happen by chance it happened, because we made it. Malik's eyes swept the room, taking in the walls that had felt like a cage just hours ago. They didn't close in anymore. He stood, his steps slow but sure, heading for the door with Daniel a pace behind. The victory tasted sweet, but it came with a shadow. This wasn't just about Malik, it was about every case Monroe had tainted, every soul she'd crushed. Daniel felt it pressing on his chest, a reminder that one win didn't fix a broken machine. But for now, Malik was free, and that was enough to keep fighting another day. As Malik Thompson stepped through the courthouse doors into the Atlanta sunlight, Daniel Hayes lingered behind, his mind already racing beyond this moment. The win was real. Malik's freedom was proof, but it felt like a single note in a much longer song. Every case Clara Monroe had ever touched flickered through his thoughts, the lies she'd upended with a smirk, the bribes she'd pocketed in the shadows, the rulings she'd twisted without a shred of guilt. This wasn't the end, it was a spark. Daniel knew the system didn't fix itself with one fallen judge. There were others out there, cloaked in robes, waiting to wield the same corrupt power. He adjusted his briefcase, the weight of it a reminder of the battle still ahead. Today's victory was a crack in the armor, but the war against a machine built on decades of silence wasn't over. "This is just the start," he muttered to himself, his voice low but resolute. Malik glanced back, sensing the fire still burning in his lawyer's eyes. But he didn't say anything, just kept walking, a free man with a story to tell. For everyone watching this unfold, here's the truth. Justice isn't a spectator sport. It's not enough to cheer from the sidelines while others take the hits. If you believe in holding power to account, in lifting up the voices the system tries to drown out, then step up. Speak out. Share this story. Hit that like button, drop a comment, subscribe. The fight doesn't stop here. Together, we can keep pushing, keep breaking down the walls. Daniel isn't done, and neither should we be. The next battle's already waiting.